Okay, so thanks for Andreas, Katrin, and Dorota for your greetings and reflections, and I think remembering something and wise words in general. Now it's time for a panel that I think both the panel and the topic are about as good and exciting as possible. The topic, as you can see, is the Compendium and World CP, soft monitoring tools for cultural diversity and social inclusion policies or instruments. And here, this is so popular that not all the panelists actually can be on the podium right now. So I start with those who are not. So Katrin is sitting there as well as Vesna, but you will then join in and take the mic either sitting or standing. We will see. So and I believe everybody knows both Katrin and Vesna. And then on the podium here we have, I'm sure you all know Sarah Gardner from IFACA. Welcome. How does it feel to be this side? I mean, not down under.
Fabulous.
Very good. And then we have Alfonso Zardi, who is the head of Democratic Institutions and Governance Department at the Council of Europe. We've known now for 2 years, perhaps, something like that, since Alfonso has had this responsibility, a thorough professional with long-standing experience within the Council of Europe, and someone that we can definitely trust and learn from. Then Heritiana Ranaivoson, we had not met before. I have seen your name somewhere, so I'm afraid I'm not in a position to properly introduce yourself, but you will say a couple of words so that everybody knows who you are. And then last but not least, Anupama Sekar, who's Director of Culture Department with the Europe Asia Foundation, ASEF from Singapore. Great to see you again. And without any further delay, I understand that the panelists have prepared short presentations. 1 or 2 will be utilizing PowerPoint. So in order to save some time for discussion, I think we have to limit your preliminary presentations to 10 minutes. So I try to be relatively strict with the time frame. Actually, we have here on the list, we have first Alfonso, and I think it would be appropriate to start with Alfonso and the Council of Europe concerning the monitoring legal instruments in the context of current policy changes. So, Alfonso, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kimmo. Thank you to the organizers of this event for inviting me. It is, to a certain extent, an in-house event, so it's quite natural that the Council of Europe is present. Nonetheless, in a sense, it takes some courage also to invite the Council to present the other side, say, of the coin, or to clarify the relationships and to develop the concept of the Compendium being part of a process that goes beyond the stricto sensu document we are talking about. I will be speaking standing, not because I feel any kind of superiority over you, but I'm not used to talking with the microphone or an ice cream in my hand. So I need to use my arms and hands like any good Italian would do when making a speech. So be passionate with me. The topic is quite challenging, and it requires perhaps a bit of an introduction. When talking about monitoring, in general, we usually understand, at least within the Council of Europe, that we talk about controlling, to a certain extent, the implementation and the respect of commitments entered by, let's say, by states, by member states. This is a relatively new development in the political culture of the Council of Europe. Which for many, many years has existed and operated as a political body of, independent, democratic states that, in a sense, trust each other, commit themselves to doing things, following recommendations, implementing conventions, as the case may be, but without feeling the need for a body or a mechanism or an initiative to check that this actually happens. We are gentlemen, we trust each other, and if there are difficulties or problems, we discuss about them. And we had fora, and still have to a certain extent, fora for that. We have the Parliamentary Assembly, we have the Committee of Ministers, and we have, I hope, and we continue to have, conferences of ministers responsible for a number of topics: education, culture, heritage, sport, youth, health, and so on and so forth. The only genuine mechanism and instrument for monitoring compliance with commitments was, and still is, the European Court of Human Rights, where it is clearly stated that member states actually commit themselves to implementing the convention, making the principles enshrined in the convention through their own norms and systems, and if anybody, it was an optional clause, now it is an obligatory clause, and it's anybody which falls under the jurisdiction of a party feels or believes that his fundamental rights have not been respected, because, for instance, he has been put in jail illegally or for too long, and so on and so forth, then the court can judge and say, yes, the country has failed to comply with the convention, and this person was actually put in jail illegally or whatever. So this was only one aspect, and for many years was the only mechanism, one could say, that enabled the Council of Europe on a very specific area, however fundamental, to check the compliance with the obligations. Then time passes and situation evolves, and the cursor has moved down the, say, the meter or the yardstick by the introduction in the system of conventions and other tools whose compliance is assessed, whose respect for is assessed. And we have different examples. We'll give you a few. There are conventions, of course, whose compliance needs to be checked by relying on the initiative of the parties themselves. They submit a report. The report is assessed by a group of independent experts. Experts may make comments and say, no, you are not really telling the truth, or your truth is not exactly what we would like it to be, because we believe that complying with these rules implies something else, something more, etc. So there might be a dialogue starting with the initiative of the parties, the independent experts, and then a position may be taken by the Committee of Ministers, judging that yes or no, the report reflects the truth, and the country has yes or no to do better. In other cases, the initiative is not left with the parties. Not because we don't trust them, of course, but because it is felt that maybe an independent oversight would be more helpful than a purely national or individual point of view. So we have conventions where the starting point is an assessment made by an independent body, a group of independent experts. And the second stage is that the country in question reacts by saying, yes, I agree, or we don't agree. You have missed the point. You have forgotten a detail. The situation is not exactly the way you have depicted. So there is, again, a dialogue, and then the group of the countries concerned may adopt a recommendation stating that country X or Y has done what it should be doing, or not exactly, etc. So you see that we are moving down the spectrum of options, with initiatives left to states or to independent groups, still in dialogue with the state. But we are talking about legal commitments. We are talking about specific conventions. Convention on Minorities, Convention on Violence Against Women, the Human Rights Convention, Social Charter. Now, we are moving in the direction of not necessarily and exclusively checking compliance with legal obligation, but also with political commitments, with political obligations. By adhering to the Council of Europe, well, you commit yourself to work for a greater unity between the members in Europe, but also to remain faithful to the principles of pluralist democracy, which means that you still keep institutions democratic and open-minded and progressive. This cannot be assessed against the yardstick of a convention. We do not have a convention on democracy. You have a convention on human rights. You have a convention against torture. You have a convention on cultural cooperation. You don't have a convention of democracy. So what is democracy? So we assess, in a sense, the democratic nature and compliance with democratic principles by member states through a different mechanism, which cannot be that of a group of national reports or independent experts assessing the situation. And this mechanism is used by political bodies, fundamentally. The Congress of Local Authorities that monitors the compliance of member states with the principles of decentralization and local democracy. The principles are derived from the European Charter of Local Self-Government. And the European Charter is not a mechanism for compliance, but the Congress is checking the compliance with the principles of the Charter on local democracy. We have the Parliamentary Assembly, which is monitoring the compliance with the principles and the commitments undertaken by new member states when becoming members of the Council of Europe after 1991, 1992, and the Committee of Ministers, of course, which has political dialogue on the situation in individual member states. And this is happening more frequently in the last few years as a result, one would say, of the efforts undertaken by many states in order to comply with the commitments they were undertaking unilaterally when joining the Council of Europe. This is an important aspect. When the Committee of Ministers invites a country to join the Council of Europe, it does it without any condition. There is no such thing as conditionality. You become a member state, but you are on the trial for 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, etc. The statute says clearly you are deemed to be capable of respecting the commitments of the statutes, of fulfilling the requirements of the statutes. And so if you are deemed to be capable, you join. If you are not, you wait. We have countries that have been invited to join, but at the instigation of the Parliamentary Assembly, we are invited to make an effort and comply with rules or subscribe to and ratify conventions, etc. Change things, the way they operate. So this is a sort of monitoring, and the states unilaterally say, okay, we have done this or not yet done that, we need the time, etc., etc. Now this process is no longer left, thanks to the unilateral initiative of those states concerned, but it is supported by the Committee of Ministers through what we call action plans, which is direct, concrete support given to a number of states saying, in order to achieve those reforms, in order to make that progress, which you are committed to and which we would like to see, we help you through action. The last point in this broad spectrum of initiative is, in a sense, the single, individual initiative by somebody in the Council of Europe to raise the issues and say, here we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. One is the Commissioner for Human Rights, which is fully entitled in its own authority and freedom to issue reports on the situation, respect for human rights in any member states or across the board. This is an issue on which a number of member states must make an effort, or in this country we have a problem, or the Secretary General himself. And now we have seen, this is the second year, I think that Catherine made reference to it, the Secretary General has produced his own report on the rule of law and human rights in member states, where he also gives an assessment of the situation, occasionally naming states, otherwise he doesn't name states, saying situation is improving or situation is deteriorating or situation is stalemate on a number of issues around the concept of democratic security. And what is democratic security? It is the correct function of democratic institutions which make democracy safe and, in a sense, and stable in those countries and avoid tensions and backpedaling on those issues, fundamentally. Now, all this is quite a broad picture, I would say, and where does the compendium, so to speak, fit into this picture? I think that the compendium, as a powerful tool for describing the situation and also assessing trends, can be very helpful in identifying what is changing and the challenges to which, indeed, cultural policies in member states should respond. So certainly a sort of dynamic approach to, let's say, compendium to the information would be extremely helpful in order to assess trends and responses to new challenges. We can, in a sense, think of this tool being used in order to either identify across-the-board issues that happen in more than one state, thematic reports, so to speak, and then spotting difficulties and suggesting potentially measures to overcome them, on a country-by-country basis or in a cooperative spirit between several countries. Or indeed, we can use this as a contribution to making the work of the Secretary General, to a certain extent, on democratic security, say, expanded to include the cultural dimension of democratic security. Sometimes we call it cultural democracy, or culture and democracy, or the contribution of democracy, of culture to democracy. To what an extent our cultural policies and initiatives aim at, in a way or another, we hope they all do, aim at consolidating democracy by making our societies more inclusive, by making our society diverse, yet responsive and respectful to what happens, by making our societies more interested in trends and making them flourish, by translating impact expectations into policy actions and generating a greater, in a sense, I wouldn't say greater support for democracy, but making, in a sense, life in our communities, life in our countries pleasant, something that people want, something that people are committed to. There is a powerful contribution that culture in general, education in particular, of course, can make to enable our societies to feel ownership of, in a sense, of the processes and the institutions. The lack of interest of citizens for institutions, lack of participation in the political processes, abstention at elections, they don't bother to vote, etc. All these phenomena may indeed reflect a lack of interest for democratic institutions. I think that culture, the compendium, can spot trends, situations, can help identify issues, and can be used in the processes that we have. The purpose of the compendium is, of course, not, in a sense, to check, monitor, and possibly sanction. Of course not. But it can be a powerful tool for raising awareness and promoting political reflection also at the level of the Council of Europe, beyond the confines of the cultural sector, where it belongs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. I resist the temptation of commenting all the speeches at this stage. I simply make one kind of point as a comment to your presentation, which is that yes, concerning the Secretary General's report on the state of democracy and on democratic security, yes, indeed, culture and democracy, etc. But first and foremost, what the compendium can do while bringing in cultural sector is simply to cover all the traditional parts of human rights. No more, no less. There is such a thing, which is, I mean, the human rights constitutes of political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. So we would actually kind of perfect that approach by bringing in one significant traditional part of human rights. So now,